Terry Bradshaw, quarterback, Pittsburgh Steelers.
Pitch by Downing, swinging. There's a drive into left center field. That ball has got to be out of here. It's gone. It's 7:15. There's a new home run champion of all time. And it's
ABC's Monday Night Baseball, live from Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts.
He is fading, looking. He's under the gun. He's shot, he throws. It is.
This is baseball, Major League Baseball. And this is Mel Allen.
Touchdown! Oh, my!
The thrill of victory and the agony of defeat.
Frazier! Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier!
And welcome to the Past Our Prime podcast with Bill Mahoney and Mark Hoffman. I'm Scott Johnston. Thanks for joining us. We are talking about an issue that came out 50 years ago today, the January 14th, 1974 issue of Sports Illustrated with Julius Erving, Dr. J on the cover, one of the more iconic players to ever play the game. And like we were saying before we started talking, you know, most guys are the face of a franchise, but the doctor was the face of an entire league.
Yeah, I mean, the ABA was my favorite league. I actually loved the ABA because it was this mystery league. Hardly any games were ever on television. CBS did a Saturday game of the week for a short time. And so the only way you could learn about these teams is like through Sports Illustrated or magazines like that. You didn't even know what uniforms they wore or stuff like that. So it was a fun league, and it was a groundbreaking league, and it actually helped the NBA when they merged because it gave them elements of the game that I think helped the NBA down the road.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. J, in my eyes, in terms of where he is, and yeah, you can go back and see Elgin Baylor as well, but he revolutionized basketball with what he was able to do. No one had ever seen what he was able to do with a basketball. In terms of when he went right before the NBA, when he came out of UMass, went to Rucker Park, there were big games there. They shut down schools so kids would sit all around the roofs just to watch Dr. J. And you think the guy, he was absolutely amazing for us when we were kids.
And no one will ever forget that, you know, that dunk he had. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could say that about Dr. J, and you're like, which one are you talking about? But the one at the All-Star game where he took off from the free throw line and kind of just, I think, opened up the possibilities that a lot of America had never seen basketball players do that kind of thing. Because, you know, a lot of, you know, back then, dunking was not a part of the game. In fact, it was not allowed for a long time in basketball. So he just brought a different element and a different showmanship without being, you know, he had that humility to him as well, but he was definitely a showman.
Well, what's interesting is because he started his ABA career with the Virginia Squires, and the Squires had not just Dr. J, they had George Gervin on that team, but they had financial problems and they had to give both players away. And with Dr. J moving to the Nets and to a major market like New York, my opinion, that really helped the ABA eventually merged with the NBA because it was a star in a big market.
And also, Dr. J was, he was approachable. He wasn't a guy that, no, I don't want to talk to you. They said before games, he would be talking to moms and dads and kids and signing autographs. He was one of the first huge ball players that made you feel like, hey, I know him. And he just came off, not just on the court, but off the court, an amazing person.
I think if you combine his ABA and NBA stats, he's the 8th leading scorer in NBA history. But I don't think the NBA counts ABA stats, which is a shame because I think at some point they should.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it seems kind of
silly.
silly.
Why wouldn't they?
I don't know.
I mean, because it's still a league that merged, so wouldn't you take those?
The interesting question would be to see if the NFL incorporates AFL numbers. To see if they do. But yeah, you're right. I mean,
yeah, the NHL doesn't. NHL doesn't count the WHA numbers. So, you know,
gotcha.
Maybe no.
The magazine starts, and by the way, we'll be talking shortly with a man who knows Dr. J extremely well, Peter Vecsey, who's covered the NBA longer than probably basically anybody. So Peter will be joining us shortly, as will a man by the name of Bill Sanders. Bill Sanders is a computer data analyst, and he worked with a guy by the name of Bud Goode. And there's a quick note here, letter from the publisher, saying that Bud Goode was a man who started using computers to pick football games and their outcomes. And, everyone does that now. But 50 years ago, that was revolutionary. And he picked the Super Bowl VIII winner. He picked the Dolphins to win by 9 over the Vikings. They were favored by 6. So he said, lay the points. They won by 17. Kind of an interesting, and at one point the teams really started getting into these computer guys and getting their opinions on certain plays. So we'll talk with Bill Sanders about his friend Bud Goode later on. But let's go right to the scorecard portion of the magazine. And anything for you guys jump out at you?
Don Peters said that fans without tickets should be on a waiting list, and ticket holders not attending the game would advise the central office, and the no-show tickets would end up with no ticket people. That is now called StubHub. That's now called StubHub. You pay for those. But just to think, you go to a game. You and I go to a game 50 years ago and go, oh, there's no tickets, but 2 guys in the front row aren't showing up. You want them? Okay.
Right.
Man.
Right. Well, the other thing about that, and I think it was in the same article, was, kids today, and here we go, right? Kids today. But they don't realize that growing up in the 70s, 80s, maybe even into the 90s, if the local game wasn't sold out, it was blacked out. There would be many games, Raiders Jets, I remember, played a playoff game where the Raiders would buy like the last 8,000 tickets to sell the game out so that it could be on TV. So, to think that that was a possibility. So they basically didn't televise home games. And finally, owners realized that, might be better off to let our product be seen by the people who will end up buying these tickets.
And I remember in baseball, they used to do that. Not only would, if the Dodgers or Angels were playing a home game, if they were playing a road game, they couldn't be on the game of the week. It was blacked out in Los Angeles. And that didn't affect attendance. It was just interesting.
Yeah.
Now every game's on TV.
Now joining us from his home, I assume, is Mr. Bill Sanders. We were talking just a second ago about the what Bud Goode started, but you would know that much more than us. If you could just give us a quick rundown or a long rundown, it makes no difference to us, about how you met Bud and what Bud was doing at the time in terms of picking football games.
Sure. And Bud's emphasis was never so much on picking football game winners, but in using stats and stat analysis to understand, why teams won, how to make teams play a better and play a smarter game through stat analysis. I met Bud when he was using software that was produced at a company I worked for, a very sophisticated stat analysis package, mostly used in biostatistics and biomath. Bud was a customer, and we were in West LA, he was in Studio City. He used to come by from time to time, and when he did, we would always talk. And I understood what he was trying to do immediately, and he didn't run into that very often. It took a pretty sophisticated stat person to understand Bud in the way he talked about football and football stats. He had done a master's in psychometrics at USC and was pretty sophisticated stat analyst. And we became great friends. I started working for him. And at the time, Bud was producing statistical reports for professional football teams. He had lost a couple of clients, but at one time he had as many as 16 client teams in the NFL using his stat reports. In fact, they were kind of complicated, and Bud used to produce a small telephone-sized booklet of reports every a week, and would send them to the teams. And he didn't have a lot of time to try and tell head coaches what this stuff meant. Bud was really responsible for the position of quality control coach coming about in the NFL, as they hired guys to try to understand the information that Bud was sending him. He had a big impact on the game.
Yeah.
And he always looked for and tried to understand, what was the important stats that separated winners from losers. And he came up with the most important one being yards per pass attempt, which is something you see now. You see them talk about it in the NFL, but they don't calculate it the same way Bud did. Bud would use sacks as incomplete passes. It's like you drop back, you're going to pass. It was an attempt. You were very unsuccessful at it, but you kind of overvalue the team if you count that as a non-attempt. It was definitely a failure, and a massive failure.
Makes sense.
It does. So Bud's numbers are slightly different from the NFL numbers in that stat, and that usually shows up as the most important stat in the game in any one particular year.
Bill, I'm looking at Mark Hoffman here. I'm looking at the picture in the magazine article, and Bud is standing in front of this IBM machine, and the how huge, and the whole room is just taken up by computers. I mean, to do what he had to do then is so much harder than now, when you have a small device and you're able to get more instantaneous results.
It's very much the case. In fact, early on, you did have to use those great big computers. And in fact, that's how Bud got started, actually. From his psychometrics education, he was a showbiz person, worked for Goodson Todman Productions in TV, was Groucho Marx's promo guy and Art Linkletter's promo guy. And his job was to really understand the ratings numbers. And one day he had a conversation with Debbie Reynolds' husband, who owned worked for a computer service bureau. Back in the days when you only had big mainframe computers, only the giant banks and corporations and big government agencies, big universities could afford to buy those things. Other normal-sized businesses would have to rent time at them through a computer service bureau. And Debbie Reynolds' husband asked Bud what they could do to promote their service bureau. And Bud said, how about the computer looks at the football game and predicts the winner? And he did that for them for the 1961 Rose Bowl and got it right. But again, to your point, the only computers we had at the time were those things that took up a great big room. They needed their whole air-conditioned floor.
Right.
They were water-cooled. They cost millions of dollars back then, when $1 million was real money.
You were either predicting football games or trying to land on the moon.
And he didn't get the results.
In fact, landing on the moon was actually easier. The backup computer for landing on the moon shortly after that was a little handheld Hewlett-Packard device.
Nice.
And you could not come close to running Bud Goode's programs on a machine like that. In fact, it wasn't until well into a couple of generations of PCs when you could actually run these routines. But it would still take half an hour, 2 hours to run and spit out the data. A couple of years later, we could do it on little laptops.
I was reading in the article that Bud said, it was said of Bud that sports was years behind the times when it came to using statistics, by Dr. W.J. Dixon from the American Statistical Association. How much did Bud get resistance to trying to implement this kind of new way to look at football?
Oh man, Bud got resistance all his life. All his life he got resistance. It's funny how he got started. He wrote the story about the 1961 Rose Bowl, predicted the winner. He happened to get it right. He'll tell you that was more luck than anything else. But some people took notice. One of the people who took notice was George Allen at the Rams, who later went on to contact Bud and say, hey, would you use your stuff to look at the game that we play, NFL football, and see if you can give us any advice on how to maybe play a smarter game? And Bud did that and started providing George Allen with information, which he used. But even so, George Allen would keep telling Bud, you know a lot about football stats, but you don't know anything about football. So even his first big fan was still giving him resistance.
Yes.
But I went with Bud. Yeah, just pick up where I started with Bud. It was back in the mid 1990s. And at that time, he was paring down the number of coaches that he worked with and eventually going to one per year. So he wanted to be able to support them a little bit better and explain to them what these stats meant, because it was still clear that the teams didn't really understand any of the stuff he was sending them. The first team I worked with Bud on was the Green Bay Packers under Mike Holmgren that went on to win a Super Bowl.
Oh,
and
nice.
Bud got an annual invite to the NFL owners and coaches meeting. I guess they call it the annual meeting now. And I went with Bud to about 10 of those. And he'd always try to talk to coaches and tell them what he did and see if anyone was interested in being a customer. And generally, for a while, he had no trouble lining up customers because all of George Allen's assistants wanted what he provided.
Right.
So guys like Dick Vermeil was a long-term customer wherever he was, and several others. But he didn't hesitate to talk to every head coach out there. And it was clear that so many of them would just push back against Bud and myself at the time. As Bud used to always tell me, he said, Bill, these guys just don't believe that two guys with a computer can tell them anything about the game of football.
Right. We're talking with Bill Sanders. I should say, actually, Dr. Bill Sanders. Bill has his PhD at Penn State. And Mark, the same thing you have, physical chemistry.
Yes.
So
No
A double masters.
and also is the co-author of the book Creative Conflict, A Practical Guide for Business Negotiators, published by Harvard Business Review Press a couple years ago. And I'm just reading this, something, Bill, you sent me, but it's kind of what you were saying about going to the owners' meetings where Pete Rozelle came up to Bob and said, hey, Bud, is Team A your client? Yes. Is Team B your client? Yes. Is Team C your client? Yes. Bud, you're changing the game. I mean, he had the attention of the higher ups.
Yes. And then the funny thing was, he charged a very small fee because he mostly sort of did this as a hobby business. He didn't really need the money. And even at that, you would have teams balk at signing up for the service. A small amount of money. I mean, our fee would not cover their jockstrap bill for the year.
Wow.
And most would either not listen for a couple of reasons. I mean, you got to understand that guys who get to the top of the game, they're NFL head coaches, they got there doing something, and they figure that they got there by doing stuff that worked that would make them a winner. And that was not always the case. And we would always see it in maybe new owners that came in and took over a team and wanted to direct emphasis in one direction. And that direction being absolutely not going to make a difference in their one-loss record. Mm-hmm. Or in especially college coaches who came to the game with a fantastic track record and washed out almost immediately because they had no sense of what was really important in winning an NFL game as opposed to a college football game.
Didn't all these stats, though, help create the quality control coach that had not existed beforehand?
Mm-hmm. The quality control coach was created to understand Bud Goode's stats. Absolutely.
What, looking back or going forward, if Bud Goode was around right now, what would be his impact? Because now everyone carries a computer on their hand. So would he just be even bigger in terms of people picking games? Would he be part of that?
Yes and no. I mean, we do still publish on our website a thing that we call the Predict Report, which shows our calculation for the point difference between every game to be played all year. And, some people are interested in that and some are not. Certainly we could use more friendly formats to make it better looking for people. And we could provide instantaneous predictions for people as well. But there are a lot of people who don't want to follow Bud's line of thinking in what's important about winning a football game. And when they hear about it, they think they can do it on their own. In fact, there are professional football teams who've been using stat analysis for as long as Bud Goode, and I swear they have not got it right yet.
Yeah, we can probably guess who those teams are. I'm a fan of one of them.
It could be. And then there are others who spent multiple times what Bud's annual fee would be to hire in-house statisticians and reverse engineer Bud's work from the reports that they had collected when they were assistants under other head coaches.
Now, 50 years ago, it said that he was syndicated in as many as 26 papers. Maybe it grew even more than that after that. But the Washington Post, the Dallas Times-Herald, the Herald Examiner. I want to say he said, when I die, and we did lose Bud a few years ago, I believe, when I die, my tombstone can say, "Here lies Goode. He told the world about average yards per pass attempt." Is that Bud in a nutshell?
That is Bud in a nutshell, yes. And the reason that's important is because if you take this one stat, yards per pass attempt difference, again, a lot of people don't understand this, but offense and defense are very nearly of equal importance. Most people would guess offense was more important. It is 51% to 49%. In other words, you can be a great team if you have a super offense, but you can also be a great team if you have a super defense. It's rare that you have a team that excels to the top 1 or 2, 3 spots in both offense and defense, talking about yards per pass attempt and yards per pass attempt allowed to your opponent. But if you take the difference, what you earn, yards per pass attempt, and subtract what you give up on yards per pass attempt, you get a small stat. 0, maybe a slight negative number if you're weak, plus 1 yard, plus 2 yards. If you earn 3 yards more than you give up, positive 3 on that stat, you're likely a Super Bowl winner. If you give up 2 yards, you're likely in the Super Bowl. You're a strong contender. 1, you're a playoff team. That one stat will tell you every year.
Wow.
Oh. So is analytics basically, we wouldn't have analytics today if it wasn't for Bud. Bud sort of paved the way for that?
Absolutely. In fact, Bud was recognized by the American Statistical Association as the pioneer, the founder of the science of statistical analysis in sports.
You've talked so much about how great a job and how Bud Goode's done so many great things in the statistical area. But then you've mentioned people like Debbie Reynolds, George Allen. What kind of guy was Bud Goode like? Not just the guy that sits in front of a computer. What was he like?
Oh, he was a crazy guy. He wanted to be a pro athlete or a coach in pro athletics, but he stood about 5'7" and weighed 135 pounds. He went to Occidental College. He was very popular in show business. His wife was good friends with a lot of show business people as well. Bud collected classic cars. He had a Camaro SS 350 that came from Art Linkletter. He had an Eldorado convertible from Dean Martin with the big 455 V8 engine in it. When Bud got very old and was having trouble driving, he would not stop driving, even though he eventually lost his license and would end up in the court periodically, and the judge just would not put him in jail, but kept threatening, and Bud just kept driving. He was tenacious and irascible and funny as could be. He was a very interesting guy.
Sounds like a great mentor and friend.
Oh, absolutely.
I was going to say, sounds like the luckiest day of your life, or one of them, is when he walked into your shop and you guys became friends. You were sort of like kindred spirits.
That is the case. I mean, we both just lit up immediately. He came in to ask one like silly question, and probably, I think I remember it was before lunch, and he stayed all day, and we spent the whole day in my office talking about stuff.
Wonderful. Hey, Bill, this has been great. I appreciate you juggling your day for us and making time for us. And now you can get back and do what's important, take care of your mom. But thank you so much for chatting with us today.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure. I hope you guys have a lot of success and a lot of luck with this. And I'll be following and watching what you do.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So that goes to show you that the computer got it right, and then the Sports Illustrated had their author named Tex Mall, and he was going to predict the game as well. So Bill Sanders predicts that the Dolphins would win by 9. They win by 17. Tex Mall predicted that the Vikings were going to win in an upset, and he was the expert. And
he's out of a job.
He's
go on.
One-time shot.
Exactly.
He's done. So
come on in. We'll talk to you about your pick.
So then, thank you, Bill. That leads us to the people portion of the Sports Illustrated. One thing that jumped out to me was that Johnny Unitas played his final game in 1973. He started 4 games for the Chargers. Some people forget that, but the future Hall of Fame quarterback had his number 19 jersey sent to the James Lawrence Kernan Hospital for crippled children in Baltimore with an inscription that read, "An appreciation for making it all worthwhile." When you think Baltimore Colts, Johnny U is definitely who you think of. So it's kind of sad that he had that. So many of the greats do that. They still want to play. They think they can play, and they end their career. Like Willie Mays with the Mets,
Joe Namath,
and that kind of stuff. Joe Namath with the Rams, right?
Yeah.
Well, he had those high shoes, those black shoes he wore, and almost like it was like lead shoes as he'd walk up to the line of scrimmage. But the thing about Unitas, I remember, a great football player, but he had that traditional crew cut. That was like his signature. And then he later became a broadcaster, and all of a sudden the crew cut was gone, and the hair was more modern and parted to the side. And it freaked me out as a kid. That's not Johnny U. He can't have a hair like that.
Right.
He needs the crew cut back.
We're just past the bowl games. We talked last week with Bob Thomas, who had the game-winning kick for Notre Dame to win the national championship. But there was a funny story, Billy, about the kid who caught that ball.
Yeah. Robert Vanderbrook. He caught Bob Thomas's game-winning field goal. Actually, what was it? He ended up going down to meet Ara Parsegian. Who was it, Scott? Someone had offered him. It was one of the players offered $500 for the ball.
It was the quarterback's. Who was
That's Tom Clements. Tom Clements' dad offered him $500. Yeah. He said no. He wants to give it to Ara Parsegian. So he goes down there. He gets it to him. Parsegian gives him 3 jerseys, a ball, and a photograph.
Yeah.
Now, Scott and I have been trying to do this, but we know there's a Robert Vanderbrook that is a doctor back east, and it might be his son. We got to give him a call and find out if he has those things. That'd be so cool. But just to think, we would have had this before we talked to Bob Thomas. We'd be,
Right, yeah.
Speaking about era, though, Parsegan, the other thing that caught my eye in the Sports Illustrated was he was advocating that instead of these national championship games, that they all of a sudden advocate for a playoff series where the top teams, compete, and they use the bowl games for that. I wonder if that ever worked.
Never gonna happen.
That'll never work.
They do it now, but it's taken all the controversy out.
It is. They just picked the 4 teams, and I also like. There's one guy in there that said he was a university president, I believe. He said there's not an athletic department in the country where officials are optimistic about the financial outlook of college football 5 years from now. Okay, he's fired. I mean, geez, they only make billions.
Missed it by that much.
He also said
a bit outside.
He said nil would never work. This name, image, likeness.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, get rid of that.
Speaking of they said it, that's a thing they have in Sports Illustrated. Just some quotes, and I like this one. This was from Woody Hayes, who said, "When we lose a game, nobody is madder at me than me. When I look in the mirror in the morning, I want to take a swing at me." So fast forward, December 29th, 1978, and old Woody did take a swing at somebody. He took a swing at Charlie Bauman of Clemson, who had just picked off Art Schlichter to end the Gator Bowl for all intents and purposes. And poor Charlie ends up on the sideline of Ohio State. And the next thing you know, Woody Hayes is just slugging this guy who's got all his pads on and his helmet. I mean, the guy obviously had kind of lost it there for a little bit, and that was the end of a legendary coach. He was fired the next day.
I watched that game live, so I saw that happening live, and from what I remember, Woody, it was like almost he had a straight arm. He like punched him like with his arm completely straight against the side, and I was looking at going, what the heck is he doing there? I mean, it's kind of similar to what...
It wasn't well thought out.
No, it's kind of similar to the way Draymond Green threw that punch the other night, or his arm came out and stuff like that.
Well, I've always blamed it on Bauman. Just don't intercept the ball. You don't get hit.
Yeah. I mean, just knock it down, give them another play.
Yes. I mean, come on, man.
Yeah.
Poor Woody.
Yeah. That brings us back to Dr. J. We talked about him briefly off the top. But joining us now is someone who covered the doctor back when he first joined the Nets, Peter Vecsey. Most people say, don't need an introduction, and then they go on to give this big introduction of who their guest is. But with Peter, I'm not going to do that. We're just going to get right to it. How big a factor was Dr. J in the ABA-NBA merger?
He was probably number one. The NBA wanted him badly, and then of course the 4 teams were willing to do anything to get into the NBA. So worked on both sides. Unfortunately for the Nets, they couldn't afford what Julius was asking for once there was a merger. To this day, I still believe the Nets that they did not have to renegotiate his contract, and he wouldn't report unless they did. His agent Erwin Weiner said that there was a verbal agreement with the owner Roy Bowe that if there was a merger, they would redo his contract. Well, I know Erwin Weiner really well. He's long past, but there is no way in the world he would have not had that in writing. So, I believe the Nets got screwed. So, but I don't believe that it was true. I think the Nets. It's funny. I'm in touch with Roy Bowe's son in the last week or two, and if I ever do get serious about finishing this book, I'm going to sit down with him and see what he knows about that. I've spoken to Billy Melchione, who was the general manager at the time, of the Nets. He said there was no agreement. Of course, he doesn't, he wasn't privy to what Roy Bode deals on the side. We understand that, but he told me that he did offer. He said, "You guys want more money?" Yeah, they were upset because Tiny Archibald, who was just acquired, was making, I don't know, say $450,000 a year, big huge money, whatever it was huge, and way more than Julius. And so they said, if you want Tiny's contract, we'll give you Tiny's contract. But the thing is with that is that Tiny's a large portion of Tiny's contract was deferred, and Julius and his agent Erwin Weiner knew that, so they didn't want that contract. So it's really sad, really sad.
So, Peter, the Nets go on to win the ABA title in Dr. J's first season, but he couldn't do it alone. I know there was John Williamson from New Mexico State, who's kind of an unknown guy, but he really shined in the finals. How good of a player was he?
He turned out to be a great player. If you look it up, the game 6 against the Denver team in the finals, 76, game 6. I don't believe Julius Erving scored in the second half. Might have, but inconsequential. John Williamson took over the second half, but the Nets down double figures, as I recall, and just he won the game. He won the game for the Nets, and Julius got the MVP, or whatever, he got the accolades. But Williamson, he was unbelievable. So anyway, that attitude that Lockery had was, I'll give you a real interesting story. Is that so? My Rucker team had won the championship in 73 and 74.
Good team.
And Julius was on that team, and there were several other Nets on that team. Billy Paultz was on my team, and Ollie Taylor, Joe Dupree, guys that weren't on the championship Nets team, but they were on my anyway. So when Lockery came in, I called him up. I think I called him. I don't think I went to see him. I called him up and asked him if he would entertain me being an assistant coach. And he said, he wouldn't. He didn't think that was good. But so all right. So now I write this column about him. 11 games in, 9-game losing streak, his attitude toward the team. And he forever and a day, he kept accusing me, to other people that the reason I wrote that stuff was because he turned me down as an assistant coach. So don't have much love for Kevin Lockery. I used to tell people, I said, Kevin stole when he won championships with the Nets, he won them because he stole my play that I used in the Rucker. And what was that? Timeout, give the ball to Julius.
Was that play 1, 2, and 3?
I mean, come on. How tough was it? Of course, again, in 76, it was, Williamson took over the game. But anyway, it was a good joke, but it was basically true. Clear out for Doc. That was Lockery. Clear out for Doc.
but Peter, that thought, he couldn't have been alone in the way that had to be a prevailing thought amongst a lot of NBA guys towards the ABA, was it not?
Absolutely. Absolutely. To this day, I still refer to Jerry Colangelo as an NBA snob. Yeah, I mean they not only did they have that attitude, but they didn't have the aptitude to scout the ABA players and understand how good they were. Although they were playing them in exhibition games, starting in whatever year, early 70s, and overall the ABA had a winning record against NBA teams. But even that, they just never understood, how good, or didn't want to understand how good the ABA was, how many great players they had. And that's manifested in many different ways. But the famous story about when the dispersal draft, in '76, and Portland got 3 ABA players in the dispersal draft. They got Moses Malone, they got Maurice Lucas. How do you think Maurice Lucas would deal with Draymond Green? And Dave Twardzik. And so, Jack Ramsey, training camp. I mean, in the beginning, he just didn't know how good Moses was. He didn't know. And so he's got Walton and he's got Moses as his centers, and they're both making $300,000 a year. And the owner, whose name I won't be able to remember, he said to Ramsey, he said, we can't afford to keep both centers at that price. So call around the league. You know everybody. He wasn't a general manager; he was just a coach. Call around. You got your friends who might be interested in trading for Moses. And he calls Red Holzman, and he said, Red, my owner wants me to trade Moses, and are you interested? And he said, is he as good as John Gianelli? I mean, there you have it.
Yeah. And the rest is history, as they say.
And Jack said to him, yeah, Red, yeah, he's pretty good. He's gonna get a lot better too. Yeah, he's young. He's only in the NBA 2 years, so he, what was he, 20, 21? And so Red passed. He went with Gianelli, and Knick fans love to hear that. And they traded him to Buffalo for a #1 pick, and then 2 weeks later Buffalo traded him to Houston for 2 #1s. And why was Houston willing to give up 2 #1s? Because they had Tom Nasalki, who was the coach, and Del Harris was his assistant, who were in the ABA. They knew. And to this day, first thing you ever ask, well, first of all, if Del Harris, when he went into the Hall of Fame, anybody asked him about his record career and stuff, he said, I owe it all to Moses. He'll say that first thing out of his mouth, Moses. So anyway, it just shows that that they didn't know what was going on, and a lot of to this day there are ABA players who are not getting their due credit, not in the Hall of Fame. The absolute players that should be in the Hall of Fame. Finally, we got 5 or 6 of them in, but still Jimmy Jones, who likes to be known as James Jones, he deserves to be in, and Matt Calvin and Willie Wise, and they absolutely deserve to be in. But Jerry Colangelo, that NBA snob, is still running the Hall of Fame. So,
hey, Peter, thanks again for rejoining us. I know you've known Julius Erving for a long time. I just want to go back to when you saw him first play at Rucker Park, what was your feeling about him, and how good was he as a player?
Well, first of all, I saw him play at the University of Massachusetts 2 seasons, and then he left after his junior year. And so the Julius Erving that I saw at the Rucker was not the one that I saw at UMass. I mean, I saw UMass play against Marquette at the Garden against Dean Meminger's team, and I lost a bet on that game, actually. And you weren't allowed to dunk. In college, you could not dunk, and you could not dunk even on the layup line. It was a technical. So yeah, that was the rule. So nobody ever saw Julius dunk. Yeah, we all knew he averaged 20 and 20 2 years. One of whatever, 6, 7, 8, whatever, how many people have ever done it, and he was one of them. So we knew that, and I wrote about him, at the Daily News, just off of what I saw. But okay, so the Rucker was a whole new Julius. And when we saw what he could do, we went ballistic. In Rucker, they got a big thing up there where if somebody does something spectacular, there's 10 minutes of court time for the fans to dance and to act out, in the stands and on the court. So the first game the first game was inside because it rained. So we had to go to a IS, whatever it was. And it's a very small gym. And we played tiny Archibald's team. And he was loaded with pros, just as my team was loaded with pros or really good college players. He had Austin Carr, for Christ's sake, who I think he might have led the country in scoring that year. And he had, Ron Behagen and Jim Brewer and Willie Worsley from the Texas Western Championship team. They were loaded. And Sid Catlett and Marvin Roberts. I remember all of them because Julius dunked on them all. And that's when we first saw him, when he dunked on Sid Catlett and Marvin Roberts, both 6'8". And, I've told this story many times, I can visualize it happening, coming down on the right side, small court. And he took off not from the foul line in the middle, but from the corner, and he dunked over those two guys. And so you can imagine, like nobody had ever seen that, so we went crazy. And then there was just more of the same after that. It just became one possession after another.
Peter, we get all caught up in the present day players. They're the best. Present day players are always the best. So, the argument is Michael and LeBron and Kobe. And, we talk about the Mount Rushmores. Is Dr. J underrated in your eyes in that regard? He seems to never, in my opinion, get mentioned with those guys. And should he be?
No, I don't think he should be. He won one championship in the NBA, and that's after Moses Malone joined up. And until then, they were runner-ups a lot, but he wasn't the same player in the NBA as he was in the ABA. And I just read a story recently that Curry Kirkpatrick did in SI that somebody sent me, and I was amazed. I never read it at the time, and he called Julius out. Like, what the hell happened to him? Where's the one what's the Julius Erving we saw back in the day? And quoted Julius, often about how things changed once he went to the NBA. That the general manager, he said this on my podcast, the general manager, Pat Williams, told him when he joined the team that we didn't get you to be the same player you were in the ABA. It's like, what? I mean, I couldn't believe it when he told me that. I said, what? And then in that Curry Kirkpatrick's piece, it's there.
Wow.
He said it way back then. And so, I find fault with Julius. I even wrote it on Twitter the other day about, for him to say some of the stuff he said in that piece, that he was willing to just defer. All right, he deferred to McGinnis the first year and the first couple of years, maybe, but they had really good teams. But he wasn't the same player. He would many trips down court. It went from one to the other, which was ridiculous the way Gene Shue coached the team. And then Billy Cunningham took over and did the exact same thing. And but he allowed that to happen. And it's funny because his wife at the time, Turquoise, she was outspoken about how angry she was that the way they were using him. I would get all my information from her, not from him. He never said a word to me, but she was outspoken. And but the worst thing he said in that piece was, I mean, I still can't even believe it. He said that I'm a follower. What? You're a follower?
Wow.
What an indictment. So no, I don't believe he does belong in. I mean, was Bird a follower? Was Jordan? Was LeBron? No. Kobe? No. Kobe wouldn't even follow Shaq.
We know.
So
Yeah.
As great as Julius was, and I truly believe the ABA points and all the other statistics should be added on to the NBA, combined with it. He still is not in that stratosphere of just taking over the way there was a merger consolidation because they wanted Julius in the NBA, and then it wasn't the same guy. Still great, still great. You know, again, I've used this many times. So Turquoise said to me when he won the MVP in the All-Star game in Milwaukee in '77, his first year, and I think I used it as my lead to my column, was that this is the first time that she saw Julius Erving play in the NBA. Whoa.
So what was Julius's peak years? Was it the first year with the Nets, the last year with the Nets?
Well, his peak years in the ABA was every year. So 5 years in the ABA, won 2 championships with the Nets, and he won, you know, MVPs of the league twice, I believe. And you know, whether he was with the Squires or the Nets, he was unstoppable.
Was
He
there-
is underrated, but no, he's not in that category. He always got pissed off at me. And again, I saw it, Curry Kirkpatrick said it in that piece about, you know, hey, you know, his jump shot's not that good. Well, anytime I said that to Julius, you know, I said to him when Jordan joined up, I said, you know, Jordan is you with a jump shot.
Mhm.
He's not happy about that to this day.
Was there just more freedom in the ABA is why?
Yeah. Yeah. It was
And-
his league, it was his team. It's like I wrote the other day on Twitter, in the Rucker, it was playtime. It was a playground game. And he just stood out and above everybody else because of what he could do. You know, everyone said, yeah, well, he's a dunker, because I compared him to Ja Morant. I saw Ja the other night, and I just was trying to think of, like, who did he remind me of, the stuff that he can do in the air. It's unbelievable what he can do in the air. If I were in Memphis, I would have season tickets. You know, people want to talk about his gun stuff. I don't want to talk about his gun stuff. He paid the price now. Let's see what happens. I want to watch him on the court. So Julius, to me, was Ja at Rucker. Even though he was 6'6", 6'7", you know, Julius he was dunking sometimes. But you're talking about, you know, a confined area, man. The playground is not that big, so there's a lot of traffic. So he was changing hands, he was changing directions, he was changing flights. You know, like every possession was just unbelievable. You know, my line at the time was, seeing is not believing.
Can you comment on the fact that, yeah, he was not passive in the ABA, but when he got to the NBA, that something inside him just wasn't there anymore?
No, I'm saying what I said was the coaches. Kevin Lockery was his coach with the Nets, and Bianchi was the coach with the Squires. And I told you, you know, last week or whatever, I said, you know, Lockery stole my play. The play was give it to Julius. And that's what Lockery did. And even in that Curry Kirkpatrick piece, he said, I think Julius said, or maybe Lockery, somebody said exactly that. They said, well, I think Julius said it, when things got wrong, when we couldn't score, Lockery said, okay, Julius, we need you to take over the game. Well, Phil Jackson did the same thing with Kobe in LA. And he also did it with Jordan in Chicago. He would, you know, run the triangle. This was one thing Jordan was furious about, is that he loved Jackson, but yeah, let's play the triangle. Now we're down 15 in the fourth quarter, and you say, okay, now it's you take over the game. And same with Kobe, exactly the same. So Julius was in the ABA allowed to take over games, encouraged. That was his job. And the NBA, no. You know, they're probably too worried about McGinnis's ego. Okay, you know, Doug Collins, same thing. Ego. They wanted their shots. and they wanted their touches and all that stuff, and he accepted it again. He said it himself in that piece. I was like, holy shit. Where was I? I should have had that subscription to SI. I know Curry real well. We covered a lot of games together. I missed that one till last week.
Peter, we do a little segment here called 50-50 where I ask the guests just a 50-50 question about the subject matter 50 years ago. And the question is, Dr. J led the Nets to 2 ABA titles in his 3 years there. True or false? Are the Indiana Pacers the only team in ABA history to win more titles than the Nets with Dr. J?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they won 3.
I figured you'd know it, but I had to
But
try.
no, they won 3, and then they lost another one in the finals. Coaching error. The players to this day will say coaching error. But yeah, the Pacers were the team, and then early on, and then Kentucky won in '75. They were loaded. Gilmore and Issel. They were loaded. Dampier. What the Nets won with was pretty impressive. They had Jim Akins as the center for the '76 team. Billy Pauls for the first one. That first Nets team was incredible. Larry Keenan, Brian Taylor, John Williamson. That team was. Bring that team into the NBA, what would have happened?
Yeah. Do you think if the Nets could have kept Dr. J and not have to basically sell him to the Sixers, it would have been better for him for his NBA career?
Well, he says that to this. He said that on my podcast. I was really surprised. He said it, that he looks back and he wishes he had stayed because he sees that he felt that team, even that '76 team, they got tiny. They didn't have Brian Taylor anymore. That was a big loss, Brian, defensively and all that stuff. But they had tiny, and he felt they would make some noise in the NBA for a number of years. I'm not so sure about that. They would have had to get better at center. No offense to Jim Akins and Kim Hughes. Well, definitely offense to Kim Hughes. But, yeah, if they had kept Brian Taylor, probably would have been that he would have made a big difference.
Hey, one last thing here, Peter. I know that my 2 co-hosts here don't know this, but you grew up with my father-in-law as a kid, Kevin Galvin. I lucked out in the father-in-law category.
Well, that's your father-in-law?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Who knew?
So you married Georgia?
His daughter. No, I married Kevin's daughter, Amanda.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was his sister. Kevin's daughters. So how many kids did he have?
3 kids, Randa, Amanda, and Matt.
And Kevin is Pat's the older one.
The oldest, yes.
Yeah, Kevin. I remember Kevin. Good guy. Is he still alive? He is, right?
Yes, he's living up in Berkeley, California.
Right. Good guy. I liked him.
And Kevin was a professor of philosophy for years and years and years.
Yeah, I do believe I ran into Kevin in California at a Warriors game.
Yeah, he told
way
me.
back. Is that right?
Yeah. So
way back when he had gotten old. I don't know what happened.
Oh, I know all of us, isn't it?
No.
I want to tell everyone that Peter has this reputation, but we had all sorts of technical difficulties, and like the pro he is,
Yeah.
He let it bounce off him, and this is take 2. But we really appreciate your time, Peter, and thank you. And I think I speak for Bill and Mark. Write that book, damn it!
Please.
Write that book.
That's a bestseller.
We want to hear the other story.
Dang.
You don't know how many publishers have turned it down, so I don't know.
I hope that some publisher wakes up and smells a copy real soon.
Well, I've got to present it in a whole different way, but yeah, we'll see.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank
All
you.
right, good luck. Thank you.
So there you have it. Peter Vecsey, never one to mince words. I mean, here you think that, he and Dr. J, are buddies, and I'm not saying they're not buddies at all.
Yeah.
But that he's gonna maybe sugarcoat it a little bit and say, yeah, he belongs, and boom, no, he comes out some old article written by Curry Kirkpatrick quoting the doctor as a follower. I mean, I'm sorry, but you just don't get those kind of answers from most people. They won't go there. So, to his credit, what a great answer.
And I just, that was a showstopper when he said that Julius said he was a follower. Yeah, I know that. I just thought, I want to say something. I thought, how do you follow that? Because that's not the guy that I saw and I followed as a kid. So when he said that, I just thought, wow, you don't get that hard hitting like that.
I really appreciated his honesty, because a lot of times people don't want to be honest. They're
Yeah.
afraid of other people's feelings.
Yep.
And it's important to be honest. And I thought it was fascinating talking about the fact that maybe if he could have stayed with the Nets, if they didn't have to, they had to pay that tax to get into the merger into the NBA and thus sold his contract to the Sixers, that I don't know if he'd stayed with the Nets, maybe it would have been a little different in the NBA. But I thought that was very fascinating.
I think that what got me was, you think about Gene Shue and Billy Cunningham had a rocket in their hand in Julius Erving. Nowadays, they'd feed the ball 30 times to Julius Erving. He'd be fed the ball and everyone else would be like, get out of the way. And you just think the branding nowadays, that they had that right there. And they said, well, make sure that the other guys get their shots, or Dr. J don't take over. That to me is just, I mean, if you look at it, just what we do nowadays, it just seems crazy.
That's why you talk to Peter Vecsey, I mean, because you think you know what he might say, or that he might sugarcoat something, like I said, and that's just not in him.
But it's fascinating because the cover, we're talking about it, and him playing against the Carolina Cougars in that first year with the Nets. That was the beginning of the 3-year period that Peter alludes to as being probably the peak of Dr. J. And he was such a young player back then.
And for a lot of us, like I was saying, I followed Dr. J in the NBA. Mark knew him or followed him in the ABA.
Well, I followed the whole ABA because it was just so fun. It was a mystery league.
Exactly, but you knew it. So, I mean, to think that his career peaked in the ABA, but in the NBA, you always have that one where he goes around Landsberger and he does the, everything else. It's just,
the other thing is they did everything they could to sign him, right? To get to the Sixers. You know what you're getting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Why are you not gonna put that to use?
You know what I would love to see is his first 2 years with the Virginia Squires, that second year with the Squires before he went to the Nets, when he played with George Gervin in his rookie year.
Yeah.
I would have just loved to see how the two of those guys played and stuff like that.
Because Gervin might have been. He would have probably given a little bit more to Dr. J, so they would have played off each other. Just man.
Now, let's move on to golf for a little bit. And, I mean, back then it was pretty much the Golden Bear, Jack Nicklaus, and everyone else. Don't get me wrong, Johnny Miller, Tom Weiskopf, Gary Player, great players. But Jack was really kind of owning the tour. And the question was, what young guys were going to come up and be the next great golfers? And a few of them started to really make headway, but one in particular, Billy.
Yeah, Tom Watson. He was 24 years old, hadn't been on the tour that long. He didn't win his first event till July of 74. But in the long run, and I am not saying that Jack Nicklaus wasn't the greatest golfer of all time, but Jack Nicklaus won 5 Player of the Year awards. Watson won 6. So, I mean, there's a guy back at the time that you're going, oh, just another guy. Like when we watch golf, there's always a young guy, oh, yeah, that guy. Tom Watson went over and above, became just an amazing, great player. And then you have to also just go back a bit with Tom Weiskopf. In that year, Tom Weiskopf won 7 of 16 tournaments. That was his year. Yeah. And he finished ahead of Nicklaus in 9 of 15 events. There were guys out there that were great. When you hear those names now, they're historical. But back in the day, they were, oh, yeah, those guys, except for Nicklaus.
Yeah, I mean, Watson won, I think, 8 major championships. I think 5 Opens, 2 Masters, and a U.S. Open title.
Yeah,
he's an all-timer, no question. But the thing is, it is fun to look back through the lens of history, because there's a lot of guys that win something and you never hear from them again. And when they're 24, you kind of make that assumption. They're like, hey, you did it once, yeah, you did it twice, whatever. But you never know when you first see greatness. Yep. And, he was, and no one will ever forget the Watson, Nicklaus, Oh, here I am. I'm forgetting it. But
Yeah.
what was it? Was it the Open that Watson beat Nicholas late?
I believe.
Yeah. So they had some great duels, and definitely two of the greatest of any era. I mean, two of the all-time greats.
But just in the days, anytime you see a golfer, you're not sure what they're going to turn out to be, even if they win a major. The only one we really knew, Nicklaus would have been one, Palmer would have been one, and Tiger Woods. When Tiger Woods won, what was it, back in '97, you knew he's going to be amazing. But no one else.
Well, in 2009, he almost won the Open Championship.
That's right.
He lost in a 4-hole playoff.
That's right.
And thinking
That's
about it, he was, how old was he at the time? 60?
Yeah,
Which
67
is
years
just
old.
crazy.
Watson, you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was just, I remember that. I remember seeing him just walking on the course, sort of had like a kid in a candy store. Like, I can't believe I'm here.
Yeah. Great player. College basketball. We talked about it a little bit last week, but
Can I just read the sentence right
Sure,
here?
sure. Go ahead.
Okay, this is what it says, and anyone in the audience listening, tell me the connection right off the bat. A broken play produced a winning basket from LaSalle's 6'10 Joe Bryant and a 67-65 squeaker over Niagara. Joe Bryant. Does that ring any bells?
I like jelly beans.
I like jelly beans too. Thank you. Stole my jelly
I think
beans.
his son played basketball. Yes, Joe Bryant's son.
Harold?
The legendary Kobe Bryant.
Yeah.
And Joe was a good player. And what I remember about Joe was he was coaching. I can't remember if it was the G League or what, but he was a player coach, and he was a coach and he decided to play in one of the games, and he scored like 40 points. And this was, he was an older gentleman there. And I remember scrambling while I was working at CBS trying to figure out how the hell to get the video of this. Because I had to find out if there was video of this. And it turns out there was a small cable company in Torrance that actually shot the game. But they wouldn't give up the tape. So I had to have the crew come over there, and they would borrow the tape, and they would feed it back to the station so we recorded there, and then give them the tape back. And that's how we got the video of that.
Now everybody has
Yes.
a tape. The other one I saw in there, that Penn beat Princeton 69-59, and their coach said patience is the key word for us now. And that coach was Chuck Daly.
Yes.
Right?
I do have one as well. You tell me who this is. He stole a ball. He dribbled quickly up the floor, took off near the foul line for the basket. In midair, changed hands with the ball by going behind the back, and finally flipped in a lefty layup from above the rim, scoring 40 points in 2 games. Who is that?
That's Mark.
That is.
Besides
Matter of
me.
fact, it was.
Besides me.
I'm done. That was a hell of a play,
Oh,
Mark.
thank you.
That sounds David Thompson
It
like.
is.
You know?
It is. He's in basically every magazine.
Yeah.
Every issue, he's done something amazing. And I'd love to get a hold of that video, and obviously the Torrance cable station's holding that one too.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, those bastards.
Once again, I can't get down there.
I saw Wes Unseld had 18 rebounds for the Capitol Bullets. Now, I didn't know this.
Oh, yeah,
I did
yeah.
not know this.
So
they were known as the Capitol Bullets for one season.
When I was a kid, I was trying to find an NBA team to root for. And I thought the Baltimore Bullets had a really cool name. And they had Earl the Pearl Monroe on the team. But for some reason, I just didn't follow them. But so the Baltimore Bullets then became the Capitol Bullets, then became the Washington Bullets, and then obviously became the Wizards years later. Because the Bullets had a negative connotation. They didn't want to promote gun violence.
In fact, yeah, they were the Bullets until 97 when they changed it to the Wizards, a year before the most famous wizard was introduced to the world.
Oh.
Harry Potter.
There you go. But you know
I was
what?
thinking John Wooden. Sorry.
John Morant would be a perfect player on the Bullets, but
He
There
would.
you go.
Yes.
I always liked the Bullets name. I know. I
It was a
understand
really
the
cool name.
connotation. It was
I
a
know.
great name.
They're firing on all cylinders.
Wes Unseld, man, they had some great players.
Yeah, they lost
they
to
could-
my Warriors in the finals. And then finally, this is in the 19th hole, which is basically the letters to the editor. And sometimes you get a good little nugget, but Brent Harshman, if you're listening, from Abilene, Texas, wrote about Abilene Christian College winning the NAIA championship thanks to a freshman All-American tailback who scored 37 touchdowns that season, went drafted in the 6th round by the Philadelphia Eagles, Became one of the greatest running backs in Eagles history.
Wilbert
Montgomery.
Wilbert Montgomery, yeah. So,
Oh man.
you know, those little schools back then, they produced some gems every once in a while.
I remember him in the 1980 NFC Championship game where he dismantled the Cowboys himself.
Yeah.
Very sad.
And who was his running mate at wide receiver?
Harold Carmichael.
Harold Carmichael, right?
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Good team.
Yes, it
Coached
was.
Coached by?
Dick Vermeil.
That's right.
Vermeil.
But they lost to
Was it Ron
The
Jaworski?
Raiders.
Jim Plunkett and the Oakland Raiders.
Was it Ron Jaworski, the quarterback,
He
too? in that?
was. Yeah. Rod Martin with 3 interceptions in that
Right,
game.
I remember that.
All right. Hey, that is the January 14th, 1974 issue of Sports Illustrated. Thank you to Peter Vecsey, who knows more about Dr. J than anyone should, and Bill Sanders for joining us on this episode. Great stuff from both of them. For Mark Hoffman, Bill Mahoney, our technician, Jeremy Ruby, that's Scott Johnston saying, we're past our prime.